Welcome to The Explainer. You know, we're often told that science and faith are at odds, right? But what if I told you there was a time, a really brilliant moment in history, when faith wasn't just okay with science, it was actually the fuel in its tank, the very engine pushing it forward? Okay, let's kick things off with a question that seems, well, almost silly. Could anyone really measure the entire Earth 1,000 years ago? I mean, your first thought is probably, no way, right? It sounds completely impossible without all the tech we have today. But as you're about to see, the real story is way more incredible. So let me introduce you to this guy, Al-Biruni, an 11th century scholar, a true polymath. And he looked at this impossible challenge and didn't just try it, he absolutely nailed it. We're talking about a level of genius that is just, wow. It's truly staggering for his era. Just look at these numbers. Seriously, using nothing but his brain, some basic tools, and a mountain, Al-Biruni calculated the Earth's radius to be 6,339.9 kilometers. Now, today, with all our satellites and gadgets, we know it's 6,356.7 kilometers. Do the math. He was off by less than 17 kilometers. That is an insanely small margin of error. To put it another way, that's 99.74% accurate. Just let that sink in. He achieved this over 1,000 years ago. No GPS, no satellites, just pure brain power, math, and keen observation. Okay, so the big question is, how? How in the world was this even possible? And maybe even more important, what kind of world did he live in that made this kind of work not just possible, but celebrated? What was going on that encouraged this kind of genius? Well, to get that answer, we need to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. We're talking about the Islamic Golden Age. See, Al-Biruni's amazing work wasn't some isolated fluke. It was a product of his time, a direct result of living in a civilization that put a huge premium on discovery and knowledge. Right at the heart of this whole era was this deep-seated spirit of seeking knowledge. It was like this incredible intellectual engine firing on all cylinders, pushing forward huge advancements in math, medicine, astronomy, you name it. But every engine needs fuel. So what was the fuel? Turns out, the fuel was something we can call spiritual power. It was basically a core belief, a theological idea that went something like this. God created this amazing, intricate world with a high purpose. Therefore, it's our duty, maybe even an act of worship, to try and understand it, to study the environment, the stars, everything. And this way of thinking didn't just pop up out of thin air. Nope. It was directly inspired by the sacred texts of the faith. And what's really wild is just how often this idea comes up. We're not talking about one or two vague lines. It's a major theme, woven right into the fabric of the text. Get this. There are more than 750 verses in the Quran that push people to observe, to think, to reflect on the natural world. It's a repeated call to use your brain and figure out how the world works. You see verses like this one, which basically says, here are the signs, now it's your job to think about them. It directly connects God's signs with our ability to reason. Or this one, which is even more direct. It's pretty much a command. Go look at what's in the heavens and on the earth. I mean, that's a clear invitation to do science, right? To study astronomy, geology, everything. So it's this whole intellectual environment, this culture of curiosity that was fueled by faith, that created scholars like Al-Biruni. He's really the perfect example of this idea in action. Okay, so back to that mind-blowing measurement of his. How did he actually pull it off? Well, he came up with a totally new, absolutely brilliant method that only required a single high place in some clever math. The process itself is just so elegant. It's beautiful. First, he figured out the exact height of a mountain. Step 2, he climbed to the peak and measured the angle of the dip of the horizon. You know, how it drops away. Then, step 3, he plugged those two numbers into a special trigonometric formula, one that he pretty much invented, and bam, out comes the radius of the Earth. And what made this a complete game changer was how simple and efficient it was. I mean, the classical Greek method, it was so much more complicated. It needed two people in two different cities far apart, measuring shadows at the exact same time. Al-Biruni's method, just one guy on one mountain. It was a huge, huge leap in ingenuity. And this guy wasn't a one-hit wonder, not at all. There's a reason he's called the father of geodesy. He was an innovator in trigonometry. He systematically mapped out the coordinates for all these different places. And then, and you gotta love this, he did some calculations on how big Europe and Asia were and basically said, there's gotta be another huge landmass out there in that big ocean. He basically predicted the Americans like 500 years before Columbus. So, when you put it all together, what's the big takeaway here? What does the story of Al-Biruni and this whole golden age really tell us? Well, it shows us that the story of faith and science isn't always about conflict. In fact, this is a perfect example of the opposite. It shows us a time when a framework of faith wasn't just compatible with science, it was the catalyst for it. The deep desire to understand God's creation was the very thing that drove people to do incredible, rational, evidence-based science. And that kind of leaves us with one last big question to chew on, right? What really is the relationship between what we believe and what we discover? Because if Al-Biruni's story teaches us anything, it's that maybe, just maybe, our deepest beliefs aren't a wall blocking discovery. Maybe they're the map.